Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Did you see the item in the Financial Times this morning? In fact, I'm sure the same thing was in several newspapers about the outgoing Pope, Benedict, wanting to speed up the conclave and telling us what the outlook was. And I thought it was very interesting because, if I remember the numbers correctly, I think it suggested that they really want to get a non-European pope, but it's pretty much has to be one of the cardinals.
Yes.
And they've got 109. Well, I think actually I don't know whether there is a precedent for a non-cardinal being elected pope.
A while back, quite some time ago.
But there's only 119 voting cardinals, and less than what is it? 18 who aren't European.
I don't think. I think there are more than 18 who are non-European.
It was in that article, and I thought it was 18, but I may have the numbers slightly wrong. But it's roughly that, I think. And one of them is a New Yorker, and that won't do.
Right.
And the ones that they mentioned were a couple of Africans.
Right.
And a few Latin Americans.
Right.
One Argentinian, couple of Caribbean, one Cuban.
Mm-hmm.
But they're really not doing very well for non-European cardinals.
No, and that's quite skewed because the church membership is diametrically opposed to that.
Yeah, so I thought this was a very good example of the problems that we're encountering now as the rate of change in the world generally continues to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we do things is dominated by institutions that we formed in the past that we're very proud of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult to work out how to keep the stability of the institutions in place and also do something that keeps up with the change.
Well, I think that's a very interesting point because the College of Cardinals, which is a relatively new innovation in the Catholic Church, I think it's approximately 600 or 700 years old. Prior to that, it was really just the bishops, and then they decided to create a more elevated rung above the bishops to work more closely with the Pope, and frankly, at that time, to give the Pope more control over them because the bishops were simply becoming too disparate in numbers and in too many geographic places. So with the cardinals, and then afterwards tradition settled in, and it was the cardinals who did the electing. It was much easier for quote-unquote control to be exercised. But your point is very well taken. All right, the way the cardinal structure is now, and has been continued by Benedict, who appointed many new Italian cardinals. It is completely skewed. I mean, the highest preponderance of Catholics are coming from Latin America, even in Africa and in Asia, and it doesn't reflect at all what the demographics are. And I mean that leads to something else completely, and that is, I mean, whether or not the Catholic Church would be ready for an African American Pope or a black Pope, an African Pope, whether the Catholic Church would be ready for an Asian Pope. We could, in the span of just a couple of years, have seen the first African American president and the first non-white Pope.
That would be very interesting. But I find it particularly interesting in the case of the Church because it has such a long tradition. Mm-hmm. That includes some innovations like what you just mentioned, the introduction of the College of Cardinals. But there have been other things that have been understood as innovations, like the infallibility decree in the 1870s and so on. But basically, it's evolved very gradually. The rate of change in the Church has been very slow.
Oh yes,
for a long time. And we depend on slow change because it gives us a sense of stability and makes us feel we know what's happening and things aren't getting out of control. And now that shadow, that's becoming not a drive from the past that ensures stability in the future, but a shadow from the past that makes the future difficult to develop and keep up with everything that's changing in the world around us.
I can see that, and I would submit, however, that if you look at the Catholic Church as a microcosm of the world, insofar as the effects of globalization are concerned, I think what you see in the Catholic Church is increasing irrelevancy in certainly the Western democracies and the industrialized countries. I mean, we've all read the stories about the American Church, for example, literally Catholics not paying attention to the doctrinal edicts coming down from Rome as far as birth control.
How did the birth rate go down if they're doing what the Pope tells them? Yeah.
Well, they're not. They're not, and it's becoming, church attendance is down significantly. I mean, church attendance in France is, for example, like way off, even in Italy. And church attendance in the United States has never been anything to brag about, especially in the last 20 or 30 years. So I guess what I'm saying is that it would seem to me that if we can see that there are big problems in the church, presumably those cardinals who are ensconced in the Sistine Chapel will have come to that recognition as well, and they'll be faced with a decision. I mean, do they change? Do they bend to the will of the numbers and appoint an Asian pope or an African pope? And then does that then lead to a complete opening up and a return to relevancy by perhaps beginning to move toward something that's more centrist, like allowing priests to marry, like permitting birth control, et cetera, et cetera?
The article in the Financial Times this morning quoted one cardinal, I forget which one it was now, saying that maybe the sexual abuse problems recently had something to do with the celibacy enforcement, which was interesting that somebody actually said that. But what I wanted to introduce into this is the fact that, 60 years ago in the 1950s, we saw the churches gradually becoming emptier and emptier, and we thought the world was going to come to an end, or at least there's going to be no morality anymore. We can't have a moral society without people going to church. Mm-hmm. And but somehow we survived, and even without the morality, and the religion declined. But then towards the end of the century, religion came back again.
Right.
And now we've got mega churches in California and in Korea and various other places. So religion obviously has a place. But another thing that happened in the 50s was that C.S. Lewis, who was the great promoter of religion in general without not caring about what denomination it would be back then, said that the most important thing is that we keep it pure so that it's worth belonging to, not open it up so that everybody can feel that it's useful to them. Mm-hmm. And Benedict has recently said the same thing, I think. And obviously he's now withdrawing from the decision, but or at least he says he is, but the cardinals have to make up their mind whether they want a smaller, more serious church or a larger, more open church.
No, that's interesting, because that former quote I've seen cardinals saying that we're interested in a smaller, more serious church. Mm. And I think if that, in fact, is the path that they're going to follow, I think that's going to be disastrous. I think if you do look back at the 50s and you look back at the lack of church attendance and the way the church had, the Catholic Church at least, had stagnated under the last of the Piuses. When John the 23rd came in, everybody simply expected him to be a caretaker. But under his brief 4-year reign, I think the biggest changes in 400 years in the church's history occurred. All right, with Vatican Council II, nobody expected that. And then after Pope Paul VI, then we of course had John Paul II, who was arguably the right man at the right time as the Iron Curtain began to come down. So you can't tell who's going to act, although presumably within the Sistine Chapel, as those men are discussing it, they'll have an inkling as to who's going to be prepared to do what.
I mean,
And I just, not to get off on a Catholic Church thing, but if they do in fact go for the more exclusive, narrow choice, it's going to be a big disappointment for a lot of people.
but from the point of view of some of us, what we need more than anything else is a church that can continue to maintain all the wonderful artworks and buildings that
Well, no, that's
we're heirs to.
that's true as well. And then also, if you turn the telescope around, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a prelate who would say to you that the church is not anything other than its people. So I mean, somewhere here. I
But
mean, this is why I said it's like a little bit of a microcosm because
the religion that's been expanding has been a different sort of religion, and been called charismatic or Pentecostal or evangelical or something like that. And in fact, that's been going on in the Catholic Church as well.
it has.
And I wonder whether there are any cardinals who are inclined or sympathetic to that interpretation of.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
So, I mean, one possibility is that Catholicism could cease to be the scholars' church of Benedict's and become something that's even beyond his predecessors' idea of the church, that is really attractive to a lot of people.
Well, it's going to be it'll be a very interesting reaction, because if they do open the windows, it could have ramifications for and really broaden it out. Could have ramifications for the church's relationship with Islam, with Judaism, with the Eastern Church. It could be very interesting, actually. It could really help in directing the globalization waves, perhaps in a little bit more organized manner, because the church, no matter what you want to say about it, still remains a supranational kind of entity. That is not
a very few.
Yeah, one of the very few, which is not universally reviled even by its worst critics. I mean, there are always some who will say, "Well, all right, it does do this well, it does that well," but
March is going to be an exciting month, I think. But I think also the reason I wanted to talk about this today is I think that it's such an interesting example of the way the past is continuing to define the present and creating problems for us keeping up with the change. And that we have similar problems to that in the American political system.
yes,
There was another article today about the Electoral College and the way that people now are trying to, apparently in the state of Virginia, there's an effort to change the way the Electoral College votes are allotted from the election. And similar things in other parts of the world. Because in the past, we've always depended upon what happened before to tell us what should happen in the future so that we could feel secure.
right.
And the present is taking over. And
Well, this is just this is a very small step forward from what you always say about the archaicness of the institutions, being unable to keep up. And if you go back and look at the church, if the church is forced to open up now, the church will change. They'll pivot. I mean, we saw that in 1961 and 62 with John the 23rd. They'll pivot on a dime. And 5 years from now, this could be a completely different viewpoint. Just the same way the perception of the American presidency has pivoted since 2004.
And
2008.
If it does happen to the church, that will be an example that others will follow.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Did you let me, if I may, gently switch topics? Did you notice the article in yesterday's New York Times about actually it was in the Wall Street Journal of all places, a long article about the divisions within the Bahraini royal family.
I saw that there was divisions, but I haven't read any details.
Yeah, apparently the current blood ruler and the crown prince have a clan of cousins that are much more Islamic fundamentalist Sunnis who are very intent and have been managing the crackdown on the Shia. In how do you pronounce the name of the Bahraini capital? Manua? Manua? But they've been something like 168 Shia have died in demonstrations because over
Manama?
That's it. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, over the past 5 months or so, and it's really a
Shia Sunni situation in the Middle East is getting worse than ever. You know that they're now the Egyptians are now promoting a group of Sunni from Iran who are fighting for their rights in Iran.
Wow.
So the Egypt-Iran relationship is now becoming more overtly a Shia-Sunni relationship.
Wow.
Which could be good. I mean, it could lead to direct negotiations. I don't know. But I think that we're moving into a period now where Shia-Sunni conflict is going to be a major factor in what happens in the Middle East.
No, I'm inclined to agree with you. When is the Iranian election?
June, I believe.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. And we're still waiting to see who the candidates will be.
Not that it really is going to matter.
Well, you never know what might happen.
No, the Ayatollah will have to take a vacation. So maybe that could. Where would he go? He'd probably.
Well, I mean, if you can assassinate American presidents once in a century, maybe the something like that will happen in Iran.
Well, we're getting perilously close to a fatwa. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Professor.